Okay, let's start another talk. The topic of this session is Fedora Workstation Year 3, presented by Christian Schaller.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm Christian Schaller. I've been involved with Fedora Workstation, I guess, since it was started. And I'm also a manager in the desktop team at Red Hat. So what I want to do with this talk was, of course, give a little summary of what sort of happened since we kicked off Fedora Workstation some years ago, some of the projects we've been pushing, and talk about also where we're going forward. So I think we've done some good things, and we had some big successes, but we also have definitely things we still need to get done. But before I get to that, I also want to have a quick little sort of background of why are we doing this. For those of you who were in Chris Wright's keynote the first day, he's a CTO at Red Hat. He mentioned, of course, that due to Linux being everywhere, we have a lot more impact and influence than we used to be, just because everyone will use your stuff. What you do means a lot more. And I think that's a big part of the motivation we have been sort of trying to push with the Fedora Workstation effort, is that we want to try to basically make Fedora Workstation, and through that also Fedora, a lot more popular than it was when we started. There are, of course, other things, like part of the big things. Of course, you have the 4 Fs from Fedora: freedom, friends, features, and first. And they, I guess, feed into how we do things and the approach we take and how we look at things. But at the end of the day, I think, at least for me, a big part of motivation of what we're doing is simply making the Linux desktop a viable alternative for more people. So far, we've seen quite healthy growth in the user base. This is an older version of the same graph that Mr. Miller showed in the Fedora panel meeting, where we also see that we are getting more and more users for every new release of the Fedora since we started the workstation effort, or started the edition effort, to be more correct. And of course, as Matthew pointed out when he showed this graph in his meeting, these are, you can't read them as absolute numbers, but they are a useful way to measure trend, because we don't collect enough data from Fedora users to have an accurate knowledge of anything. Instead, it's more that we, of course, by the servers that we run and feedback we get from the mirrors, we can sort of at least say some trends in terms of downloads and so on. And of course, there are certain things here that we have improved that might influence this too. Like, I mean, this is, for this graph, we have a graph showing the number of new downloads of each ISO, and that is growing. But on the other hand, as we have improved a lot the upgrade inside Fedora Workstation, we are hoping and assuming that more people actually are doing just a simple upgrade now instead of reinstalling for every new release.
So these are the ISO downloads?
No, this is update connections. Yeah. Yeah. So that said, we have grown a lot, and those who saw Matthew's graph see that we still seem to have a decent growth. But that's personally, I believe that we still need to more or less at least double where we're currently at before we're at a level where we have called enough critical mass to position ourselves basically to influence both where the general Linux desktop are going, but also to really push where Linux is going in the general market in competition with Windows and Mac and so on. So successful projects. There has been a lot of projects that we launched as part of sort of our effort. So when we started during the first workstation, we talked a lot about like what do we need, which pieces do we need in place in order to have a chance of succeeding. And for instance, one of the first things that we decided to do was, of course, get behind the VLAN effort, which at that point was more or less run solely by Intel, by this guy called Christian Hergert at Intel. And it had been around for a while and sort of was supposed to be the replacement for X, but it was slow going, and we decided to basically jump in there and put a lot of resources behind it to make sure that we got to our finish line and could actually start deploying it. And the motivation for it was that we decided we needed something that was more secure and also easier to extend with the features we wanted, and generally a more modern architecture. And in retrospect, I sort of think that maybe this was a bit of a gung-ho thing to do. I mean, there has been many corpses found on efforts trying to replace X. But I think at this point we have succeeded. We still have a few items we need to improve still under Wayland, for instance, but more or less it's there, and it's a default to Fedora. We have actually a preview in the latest RHEL 7.5 release. And of course, other distributions are picking up, and other desktops are quickly picking up Wayland support too. The other big effort that we pushed, and that was led by Alex Larsen, who's actually sitting in the front here, was Flatpak, which was an idea to come up with a container technology for the desktop that would fix a lot of these problems that we saw or felt had held the Linux desktop back for many years. There was multiple things like the disconnect between the people publishing the software and the packaging and distribution of it. Alex in his talk pointed out the challenge of that you could have months, maybe even years between you shipping a new version with a bug fix or an improvement before it actually reaching your users. And at the same point, it was also a way to try to fix the problem, right? That we have the Linux landscape is quite diverse, a lot of distributions, a lot of different ways to do it. So if you were, especially a commercial company and deciding to support Linux, packaging yourself for each of those different operating systems is not really a viable option. And with Flatpak and containers, we felt that, hey, we can actually produce something that in 99.5% of the cases will work on any distribution you want to deploy it. So Flatpak, I would say, just like Wayland, is sort of more or less there now in terms of getting the technical framework done. Now they're working on a plan to sort of do a formal 1.0. But at the moment, it's more about now figuring out some of the, call it, finer details, like getting the production pipelines rolled out. We had a talk by Owen, for instance, talking about how we're trying to build Flatpaks inside the Fedora infrastructure. And of course, doing outreach to companies, trying to get them involved and interested in making Flatpaks or their own software, and so on. The last little project on my list, it's sort of like, I guess, a little bit more niche and small one. It's a project called Ratbag, which is something that our input folks did, Benjamin Tissoir and Peter Hutter, to support. The original goal was just to support these kind of gaming mouse or high-end mice that you could buy that have like 1 million buttons and LED lights and so on. And that project has also come along very well, and we got a lot of direct support now from hardware vendors behind it. The last effort that I don't really have a good logo for, which I think very recent events have showed the importance of, is this thing we call the Linux Vendor Firmware Service. And that was an effort we kicked off because we realized that a lot of problems by running Linux on a laptop, for instance, were caused by out-of-date firmware. And I think in many cases people just assume it was like Linux sucking. That was the reason for anything from bad battery life to let's say some buttons not working, but in many cases it was actually broken firmware. So we created the Linux Firmware project to create an easy way for vendors to supply firmware for Linux clients. And we got some good collaboration there with some major companies like Dell, Logitech, and so on, who have started pushing firmware into it. And I guess the good thing that I guess also showed the value to a bigger audience was, of course, with Spectre and Meltdown. A lot of people realize, hey, actually being able to update my firmware is a good thing. So we have now a lot more hardware vendors working hard and intensely behind the scenes to try to make sure they get their firmware also uploaded to this thing. So these are sort of some of these efforts we sort of did to get the foundations right. And I do believe we're close to there. I have one more thing I will talk a little bit about at the end, which is the discrete graphics, which was asked about earlier. So if I have time, I will talk about that. But these are sort of the main efforts we've been doing to sort of get to a baseline where we have the technology and the pieces we need to make a push for going bigger. So these are sort of efforts that, of course, are still underway and we're still growing. But I think we have sort of two efforts now which we are using to try to go a step further. The first one of those is Fleet Commander. Fleet Commander is a tool that you basically is an extension for Cockpit. but it also has a piece running on each individual workstation that allows you to deploy configuration settings to a huge number of desktops. So if you are a university or a company and you, for instance, want to share something like, well, it could be as simple as a bookmark list, or you want to update everyone's network configuration, or reconfigure their email clients, you can use Fleet Commander to create profiles, and it's tightly tied in currently with LDAP. So it will, make sure that if you have a group in a company for, the IT department, they can have one profile, marketing can have another, and so on. And these profiles are stackable. So you can have like an individual, well, you could have an individual profile for one user, and then stack a profile for his team, and then of course maybe another one for the department or something. There has been another talk also here at Flock going into much more detail about Fleet Commander. But I think it's a very crucial effort, because it's one where we are really taking advantage of also the benefit of being part of a bigger system and ecosystem like Fedora and Red Hat is. As I said, it integrates closely with free API, and the goal there eventually is that you can go into Cockpit just with a few clicks, set up a free API instance, enable it for Fleet Commander, and then start adding systems to it, and then suddenly you have a easy to manage system. And of course, for big enterprises that already are running LDAP, they can easily start using this and deploy profiles to their clients. It's also worth mentioning there that we are working on extending this to support Active Directory, because we also want to make sure that when people have, for instance, a group of Linux machines in maybe a predominantly Windows setting, they can still be centrally managed easily through an easy-to-use web interface. The other effort I wanted to highlight there in sort of what we're going forward is this effort called Pipewire. Wim Tymans behind that did a talk about that on Friday. And that's this new multimedia framework that we're building. The goal there is actually to replace, well, first is to create a piece to do more advanced video handling than we have today. So instead of everyone going directly to your V4L device, for instance, we now have Pipewire there, doing a similar job that what Pulse Audio has been doing for audio, right? So you can have multiple things sharing it, but you can also treat things like your desktop, for instance, as a virtual source, so that when you want to do streaming of your desktop for disk sharing or just disk recording, it will just treat your desktop as one other video source among many, and you can then more easily mix things together to create, for instance, a picture-in-picture setup if you want to do a tutorial. But we decided that we didn't just want to do, add yet another little component that had a little bit of system. So Wim has been working on verifying his design and making sure it works for a lot of use cases. So he already has an emulation layer for Jack, which means that any Jack client will run more or less unchanged on top of Fleet Commander, on top of Pipewire. And the goal there is then so we can bring basically this pro audio group that's that has so far sort of been stuck as a little sort of weird add-on on the side in the Linux ecosystem, but bring them into the mainstream and make their experience as easy and fluent as another user. And the goal also there is in the long term eventually replace Pulse Audio, or at least make Pulse Audio maybe just a smaller bit running on top of Pipewire. So that you have one system handling everything and dealing with, balancing between them. So in Fedora 28, well, we have Pipewire shipping in 27 as a tech preview, so you can play with it there. But in 28, we expect to have it running and using it for things like screen sharing, for instance, in web browsers. And that's actually going to also fix one of the last gaps we have with Wayland. Which is due to the new security model in Wayland. You no longer, a lot of these things you want to do full screen share from a Google Hangout, for instance. It doesn't really work. But we will work to make sure that Pipewire can cover that functionality and sort of make sure we're back to parity there. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a bit about market challenges. I think one of the things, of course, we've seen, we saw that growth curve going up. And as we go forward now, we have a different setting to deal with. Like, for instance, the competition has, in some sense, become more like us. For instance, Ubuntu ended up switching back to using GNOME 3. And of course, when this happens, it's harder to differentiate. But I do believe that, for instance, like efforts through Fleet Commander, which of course ties together a lot of the different things that we have been pushing, it's something that at least, there's maybe less interest in taking on by everyone else, just because it sort of builds on so many things that are maybe quite strongly identified, for instance, with Fedora and with Red Hat. The other thing we, of course, need to do in such a setting is that we need to focus on things, for instance, like quality. And I do believe that we have a lot of efforts underway that's, for instance, going to greatly improve the quality of our offering. In terms of improved CI systems and so on. And as going back to what I said with Fleet Commander with manageability, that we can also show that we are putting in a lot of work and effort to testing and verifying that we have a good story on manageability. Okay, so I see I have some minutes left, so I will skip questions and go back to that and talk a little bit about this because it came up earlier. So one thing we did decide when we started Workstation was that we knew that we had a lot of people using Fedora, and for that matter using RHEL, together with their binary and NVIDIA driver. And it was an eternal problem. It was always like, first of all, you had a basic issue of the NVIDIA binary driver conflicting with the Mesa package on your system. And also, of course, it was... and due to that, you risk doing upgrades and things breaking, and then you have to go back and figure out what went wrong and fix it again. And at the same time, I guess, especially coming from Fedora context, we didn't necessarily just want to smack it in there because we wanted to, still emphasize our support for doing everything in open source. But we wanted to lower the threshold and make it, dead easy for people to install the binary driver if they needed it. So we ended up having a lot of discussions with a lot of different groups. Figuring out, okay, what are the practical problems here? What are the legal issues? What are the practical problems? And we ended up, and of course, people kept telling us, oh, look at Ubuntu, they already fixed it. So we, of course, tried to look at what Ubuntu was doing. And our conclusion was, first of all, looking at Ubuntu, that they were not doing the right thing. They were basically just, coming up with various scripts and hacks to sort of jam it in there. So instead we went back to our graphics team and we came up with ways to allow the system to have multiple OpenGL implementations installed, and we talked to NVIDIA to get them to support this with us. And we talked to various third-party packagers about how they could optimize the way they package the driver. So today on Fedora, you should be able to install the binary driver without any kind of file conflicts with the core system. And we're working now on the next step on trying to figure out how we can improve things like power management and also handling of discrete graphics when you do the NVIDIA driver. Because it works at the moment if you, for instance, have a workstation, but on the laptop where you need to, for instance, power down the discrete graphics, we're not fully there yet. Yeah, so I'm out of time. But, okay, so we have a few minutes for questions. So any questions from anyone? Andreas?
Yeah, I was curious about the timer thing.
Yeah.
With regard to the sharing of your screen. So would that be support from, say, code into Hangout and all these guys, or will it just work out of the box?
It will require code in the WebRTC stack of the browsers. But once it's there, then any application that currently relies on the browser WebRTC stack will automatically get the functionality. So our plan is to make sure we push patches that enable this support. And then the nice thing there is that the WebRTC stack is actually shared between both Chrome and Firefox, so we only need to do it once. So there's actually going to be a Hackfest here in Brno on Tuesday looking at that specific issue with the browsers and trying to make sure we get the support in. So as soon as that's there, theoretically at least, it should just work from that point on. Any other questions? Yeah?
What's the intersection between the GNOME community and Fedora community?
Okay, yeah, so the question was what the intersection is between the GNOME community and the Fedora community. Well, I mean, I guess due to so many people working for Fedora, for instance, being involved with both, I guess there's a quite huge intersection. And of course, I think in that group we have some people identifying stronger with Fedora and some people identifying stronger with GNOME. But I mean, I think we have been quite successful in the context of the Fedora Workstation effort to sort of meld the two groups and getting getting sort of everyone on more or less the same page, and making sure that, you know, maybe in some cases we differentiate a bit from upstream GNOME. Like, you know, a good example is we ship Firefox as opposed to shipping the GNOME browser. But of course, I mean, I think as this work progresses, within like on the workstation, we have a continuous discussion both with, you know, older stakeholders in the GNOME community and of course older stakeholders in the Fedora community. Any other questions? Yeah.
How do you look like, or how do you try to fix the visibility, like in searches? Like most of the time, if I look for something, how to do something, I mostly find either Ubuntu or lately I find a lot of Arch, but it's rarely that I find something for Fedora to find how to do.
Yeah. Well, there's actually a separate effort that was mentioned in the Fedora panel to try to improve the documentation side. And of course, I think that's crucial. I mean, I also am of the opinion that if we are able to, you know, make Fedora, well, the better we make Fedora as a workstation and more people want to use it, then automatically that will also improve the documentation side, because the more users you have, the more chance there is of someone, you know, sitting down and writing a blog post, hey, how I did this cool thing in Fedora, and then people find it. So I think my hope is that between continuing to grow our user base and, of course, things like this documentation effort, led by Brian Exelbird, I think his name is. I'm hoping that we can improve on that point. Anything else?
Last question.
Yeah?
What do you see as the main challenges going forward? What is the top three?
Top three challenges. I think that the main challenge we have and that we are focusing a lot on is figuring out how, I think, over the years to lead this up, I think we've gotten both used to and also expecting that things just going to work out of the box, which means we need to have a much closer relationship with hardware vendors. And I think that to me is, beyond anything else, a number one challenge, that, you know, people need to be sure that if they get a laptop, they can boot it and Linux just works. And my belief there also is that it's of course impossible to make that as a general statement, but I want us to try to, you know, develop relationships with a few major vendors, saying that, hey, you know, these systems are certified and they work fully. And I mean that in like every sense, like even there shouldn't be any random piece of hardware on a given laptop if it's said to be you know, certified, or if it's said to be fully supporting Linux, that doesn't work. The other thing, of course, is that there's a general, I guess, is finding the balance to some degree between more traditional desktop systems, which to me, and versus things like Chrome OS, for instance. And to me, I think that will be a natural split between what I call, like, you know, creators and makers, maybe using these more traditional systems, and people who are mostly focused on consuming, moving to tablets or to Chrome OS systems and similar. On top of my head, I don't have a good third item at the moment, but yeah. Okay, I think that's it. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Ja, tack för det, Gnome.
Thanks.
Ja.